My name is Sofia Martinez and I am 28 years old. Last Sunday at our monthly family dinner, my parents looked me straight in the eye and declared I was the most useless child they had ever raised. What they did not know was that I had just discovered something that would shatter everything they believed about their perfect golden children. The family secret I uncovered that night would turn their world upside down and prove that sometimes the so-called useless daughter holds all the power. Hey everyone, before we dive into this absolutely wild family drama, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and do not forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this story about family betrayal and sweet revenge is going to blow your mind. Trust me, you will want to see how this unfolds. The Martinez family dinners had always been a monthly tradition that I dreaded more than root canal surgery. Every first Sunday we would gather at my parents' sprawling suburban home in Phoenix, Arizona, where my mother would serve her famous enchiladas and my father would hold court like some kind of family patriarch. My siblings would arrive with their success stories and achievements, while I would sit quietly picking at my food and enduring the subtle and not so subtle comparisons. My older brother Diego was the family golden boy. At 32, he was a successful investment banker with a picture-perfect wife named Amanda and two adorable children. He drove a BMW, owned a house in the best part of Scottsdale, and never missed an opportunity to mention his latest promotion or bonus. My younger sister, Carmen, 25, was finishing her residency as a pediatric surgeon. She was brilliant, beautiful, and everything my parents had ever dreamed of in a daughter. Then there was me. Sophia, the middle child who had bounced between jobs, struggled through community college and was currently working as a freelance graphic designer from my tiny apartment. According to my family, I was the disappointment, the one who never quite lived up to expectations. They never said it outright, but their disapproving glances and passive-aggressive comments spoke volumes. That particular Sunday started like any other. Diego was bragging about his latest client acquisition while Carmen discussed her upcoming board certification exam. My parents beamed with pride, hanging on their every word like they were sharing Nobel Prize acceptance speeches. Meanwhile, I sat there, pushing refried beans around my plate, feeling invisible as usual. The conversation eventually turned to family finances, specifically my grandfather's inheritance that had been distributed among his children years ago. My father mentioned how grateful he was for the financial foundation it had provided for their family business ventures. That was when something clicked in my brain. I remembered my grandfather mentioning something about setting aside money specifically for his grandchildren's education and future endeavors. After dinner, while everyone was gathered in the living room discussing weekend plans, I excused myself to use the bathroom upstairs. But instead of heading to the guest bathroom, I found myself standing outside my father's home office. The door was slightly ajar and I could see stacks of financial documents on his desk. Something compelled me to step inside. I knew I was crossing a line, but curiosity got the better of me. Among the papers scattered across his mahogany desk, I spotted a folder labeled Estate Documents. Roberto Martinez Sr., my grandfather's name. My hands trembled as I opened the folder, not sure what I was looking for but knowing I needed to see what was inside. What I found made my blood run cold. There were bank statements, investment accounts, and legal documents that painted a completely different picture than what my parents had told us. According to these papers, my grandfather had indeed set up education trusts for each of his grandchildren. 3 separate accounts, each initially funded with $50,000 and growing with interest over the years. But here was the shocking part: only 2 of the accounts showed withdrawals. Diego's trust had been completely drained to fund his MBA at Wharton. Carmen's account had been used for her medical school tuition at Johns Hopkins. My account, however, remained untouched. Not only had the original $50,000 grown to nearly $80,000 with compound interest, but my parents had been using it as collateral for their various business loans. I photographed every document with my phone, my hands shaking as the implications sank in. While my siblings had received world-class educations funded by our grandfather's generosity, I had been told there was no money for college. I had worked 3 jobs to put myself through community college, accumulating debt and struggling financially, while my trust fund sat there earning interest for my parents' benefit. The most damning document was a letter from my grandfather to my parents, written shortly before his death. In his shaky handwriting, he specifically instructed that Sophia's fund should be preserved until she was ready for higher education or starting a business, noting that she had shown the most creative potential among his grandchildren. He had believed in me when no one else did, and my parents had deliberately hidden that from me. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly closed the folder, slipping out of the office just as my mother appeared at the top of the staircase. She gave me a suspicious look, but I managed to play it off as getting turned around looking for the bathroom. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. When I returned to the living room, I looked at my family with completely different eyes. These people who had made me feel worthless and inferior had been stealing from me for over a decade. They had watched me struggle financially while sitting on money that rightfully belonged to me. The hypocrisy was staggering. The worst part came as I was preparing to leave. My father pulled me aside and launched into one of his typical lectures about responsibility and making something of myself. He compared me to Diego and Carmen yet again, suggesting that maybe I just was not cut out for success like them. The words that would haunt me for weeks came next. Sophia, you have to face facts. You are the most useless child we have. Maybe it is time you stopped dreaming and accepted reality. I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the defeated daughter they expected me to be. But inside, a fire had been lit. I had evidence of their deception, and I was going to make them pay for every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, and every stolen opportunity. They had no idea that their most useless child was about to become their biggest problem. The drive home from that dinner was a blur of rage and revelation. I gripped the steering wheel of my beat-up Honda Civic so tightly my knuckles turned white while my mind raced through years of manipulation and lies. Every financial struggle I had endured, every time I had eaten ramen noodles for dinner because I could not afford groceries, every rejection letter from universities I could not afford to attend, all of it had been unnecessary. My parents had stolen my future, and then had the audacity to shame me for not achieving more. I spent that entire night poring over the photos I had taken, researching trust law and building a timeline of their deception. The more I dug into the details, the angrier I became. According to the documents, my grandfather had established the trusts when I was 16, Diego was 20, and Carmen was 13. The funds were supposed to be accessible when each grandchild turned 18 for educational purposes or 25 for any other life goal. I was now 28, which meant my parents had been illegally controlling my money for 10 years. Not only had they denied me access to my inheritance, but they had also been using it to secure business loans for my father's construction company. The interest alone that had accumulated over the years was substantial, and they had been benefiting from money that legally belonged to me. But this was about more than just money. This was about a decade of psychological manipulation, of being made to feel inferior and worthless, while my siblings were elevated as the family success stories. They had created a narrative where I was the failure, the disappointment, the one who just could not get her life together. Meanwhile, they had been systematically sabotaging my opportunities while funding my siblings' achievements. I realized I needed to approach this strategically. Simply confronting them would lead to denial, gaslighting, and probably legal maneuvering to cover their tracks. I needed allies, evidence, and a plan that would expose their hypocrisy while ensuring I recovered what was rightfully mine. This was war, and I intended to win. My first move was to contact my grandfather's attorney, whose name appeared on several of the documents. James Whitfield had been practicing estate law for over 30 years and had handled my grandfather's affairs. When I called his office Monday morning, I was surprised by how quickly he agreed to meet with me. Apparently, he had been expecting this conversation for years. Your grandfather was very specific about his wishes regarding your trust fund, Mr. Whitfield explained during our meeting. His office was lined with law books and family photos, giving it a warm but professional atmosphere. He was concerned that your parents might not handle the distribution fairly, which is why he included specific language requiring annual reports and beneficiary notifications. I learned that my parents had been legally required to inform me about the trust fund and provide annual statements showing its growth and any transactions. They had been in violation of the trust terms for over 10 years. More damning, still using the trust as collateral for business loans without my knowledge or consent was a serious breach of fiduciary duty. What are my options? I asked, already knowing I wanted to pursue every avenue available. Mr. Whitfield smiled grimly. We can file for immediate release of the funds plus interest and penalties for the unauthorized use. Depending on how much they have borrowed against it, they could be facing significant financial liability. But Sophia, this will destroy your relationship with your family permanently. I thought about Sunday's dinner, about my father's cruel words and my mother's complicit silence. I thought about years of being made to feel worthless while they profited from my inheritance. Mr. Whitfield, they destroyed our relationship the moment they decided to steal from me. The next step was gathering more evidence. I needed to document their pattern of favoritism and financial manipulation. Fortunately, my family had always been obsessive about social media, particularly my mother, who documented every family achievement and milestone. I spent hours screenshotting posts about Diego's graduation from Wharton, Carmen's acceptance to medical school, and various family celebrations where my accomplishments were notably absent. I also reached out to my grandfather's former accountant, who provided additional documentation showing the original trust setup and my parents' subsequent management of the funds. The paper trail was extensive and damning. They had not only hidden my inheritance but had also used it to fund opportunities for my siblings while denying me the same advantages. But I wanted more than just financial restitution. I wanted my family to understand the full scope of their betrayal and face consequences for their actions. That required a more comprehensive strategy, one that would expose their hypocrisy to the people whose opinions they valued most. I began documenting everything with methodical precision. I created spreadsheets comparing the opportunities my siblings had received versus what I had been denied. I calculated the compound growth of my trust fund and the profits my parents had made by using it as loan collateral. I researched my siblings' educational costs and career trajectories, building a case that their success was built on stolen opportunities. The psychological warfare came next. I started subtly questioning family narratives during phone calls with extended relatives. I would casually mention struggling to pay for community college while Diego attended Wharton, or comment on how different my life might have been with the educational opportunities my siblings had received. I planted seeds of doubt without making direct accusations, letting others draw their own conclusions about the fairness of how opportunities had been distributed in our family. I also began rebuilding my own life with renewed purpose. I enrolled in online business courses, launched a more professional graphic design portfolio, and started networking with potential clients. The anger I felt toward my parents became fuel for self-improvement. I was determined to succeed, not despite their sabotage, but to prove that their assessment of my worth had been completely wrong. Meanwhile, I maintained my role as the disappointed daughter during family interactions. I attended the next family dinner as usual, nodding along as Diego discussed his latest promotion and Carmen shared news about her residency. But now I saw through their performances. I watched my parents beam with pride at their golden children's achievements, knowing that success had been purchased with money stolen from me. The hardest part was remaining calm when my father made another disparaging comment about my career prospects. Maybe you should consider a more stable job, Sophia. This freelance thing does not seem to be working out for you. The irony was suffocating. Here was a man lecturing me about financial stability while literally stealing my money to fund his business ventures. But I smiled and nodded, playing my part perfectly, because I knew something they did not. I had evidence of their crimes, legal representation, and a plan that would turn their world upside down. They thought I was weak, defeated, and resigned to being the family failure. They had no idea I was preparing to destroy the foundation of lies they had built their perfect family image upon. The pieces were falling into place, and soon it would be time to make my move. They wanted to see what their most useless child was capable of. They were about to find out exactly how dangerous an underestimated daughter could be when she finally decided to fight back. The transformation in my approach became more strategic as the weeks progressed. I had moved beyond the initial shock and rage into something far more dangerous: calculated determination. Every interaction with my family became an opportunity to gather more intelligence while maintaining my cover as the defeated daughter they expected me to be. My first major breakthrough came through an unexpected ally. During a casual conversation with Carmen at a coffee shop, she mentioned feeling guilty about how differently our parents treated us. We were meeting to discuss our mother's upcoming birthday party, but the conversation took an interesting turn when she admitted she had always wondered why I never went to a 4-year university like she and Diego had. "I mean, you were always the creative one," Carmen said, stirring sugar into her latte. "Your art projects in high school were incredible. I always thought you would end up at some prestigious art school." There was genuine confusion in her voice, which told me she truly had no idea about the trust funds. I decided to test the waters carefully. "College was just too expensive," I said with a shrug. "Mom and Dad said there was no money for it after helping Diego with his education." Carmen's brow furrowed. "But I thought Grandpa Roberto had set aside money for all of us. I remember Mom mentioning something about education funds when I was applying to med school." Bingo. My sister knew about the funds but clearly did not understand the full scope of what had happened. "I could work with this." "I never heard anything about that," I said carefully. "Maybe it was only for you and Diego since you were pursuing professional degrees." The seed of doubt I planted in Carmen's mind began to grow over the following days. She called me twice that week with questions about our grandfather's estate and our parents' financial decisions. She was starting to piece together the inconsistencies in the family narrative, and I could tell she was uncomfortable with what she was discovering. Meanwhile, I was building a more comprehensive case with Mr. Whitfield's help. We had uncovered additional evidence of my parents' financial misconduct. Not only had they been using my trust fund as collateral, but they had also been withdrawing small amounts periodically to cover business expenses. These withdrawals, while individually minor, added up to nearly $15,000 over the years. More damaging still, we discovered that my parents had been claiming tax deductions for educational expenses they had never actually paid. Diego's Wharton tuition had been fully covered by his trust fund, but my parents had claimed it as a business expense for tax purposes. Carmen's medical school costs had been similarly misrepresented. They had essentially been committing tax fraud while stealing my inheritance. Mr. Whitfield advised me that we now had grounds for both civil and potentially criminal charges. The evidence was overwhelming and the financial damage was substantial. But he continued to warn me about the personal consequences of moving forward. "Your family will likely never forgive you for this," he said during one of our strategy sessions. "Are you prepared for that possibility?" I thought about Sunday dinners spent feeling worthless, about years of subtle and overt criticism, about watching my siblings succeed with advantages that had been denied to me. "Mr. Whitfield, they have never truly accepted me anyway. At least this way I will have justice and the resources to build the life I should have had." The next phase of my plan involved expanding my network of allies beyond just Carmen. I reached out to my cousin Miguel, who had always been close to our grandfather and had strong feelings about family loyalty and honesty. Miguel was a successful attorney in his own right and had always treated me with more respect than my immediate family did. During a casual lunch, I carefully shared some of my concerns about inconsistencies in our grandfather's estate distribution. Miguel was immediately interested and offered to help me research the matter further. Having another legal mind on my side, especially one with deep family connections, was invaluable. Miguel's investigation confirmed everything Mr. Whitfield and I had discovered, but he also uncovered additional family members who had been affected by my parents' financial manipulation. It turned out that my parents had been named as trustees for several other family members' inheritances and had been making questionable decisions with those funds as well. "This is bigger than just your situation," Sofia Miguel explained over dinner at his favorite Mexican restaurant. "Your parents have been playing fast and loose with family money for years. Other relatives have wondered about missing funds or unexpected changes to inheritance distributions. The web of deception was more extensive than I had imagined. My parents had positioned themselves as the responsible financial stewards of the family, but they had been systematically enriching themselves at everyone's expense. They had built their reputation and success on a foundation of stolen money and broken trust. I also began building alliances outside the family. My landlord, Mrs. Rodriguez, had always been kind to me and had often commented on how hardworking and responsible I was despite my financial struggles. When she learned about the situation, she was outraged on my behalf and offered to serve as a character witness if needed. My former community college professors rallied around me as well. "Doctor Sarah Thompson, who had taught my business communications course, remembered my potential and was furious to learn how my educational opportunities had been sabotaged. She wrote a detailed letter documenting my academic abilities and the financial hardships that had limited my options. The evidence was mounting, the allies were in place, and I was ready to move to the next phase. But first, I wanted to give my family one final opportunity to reveal their true character. I decided to test them by asking for a small loan to help expand my graphic design business. I presented a detailed business plan to my parents, showing projected income growth and explaining how a $5,000 investment could help me purchase better equipment and marketing. I watched their faces carefully as I made my pitch, looking for any sign of guilt or recognition about the money they had stolen from me. My father's response was exactly what I expected. "Sophia, we have already invested so much in Diego's and Carmen's careers. We just do not have the resources to fund another risky venture. Maybe you should focus on finding a stable job instead of chasing these entrepreneurial dreams." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Here they were lecturing me about financial responsibility while sitting on nearly $80,000 of my money. They had funded my siblings' dreams while telling me mine were unrealistic and risky. My mother chimed in with her typical passive-aggressive support. "We just want what is best for you, Mija. Maybe this graphic design thing is not working out because it is not the right path for you. Some people are meant for different things." I nodded and thanked them for their honesty, playing the role of the dutiful daughter, accepting their wisdom. But inside I was seething. They had just confirmed that they had no intention of ever treating me fairly or giving me the opportunities they had provided my siblings. That night I called Mr. Whitfield and gave him the green light to file all the necessary legal paperwork. It was time to stop playing games and start demanding justice. My family wanted to see what their most useless child was capable of. They were about to find out. But I had one more card to play before the legal battle began. The family birthday party for my mother was coming up in 2 weeks, and all the extended family would be there. It would be the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth about my parents' deception in front of everyone who mattered to them. They cared so much about their reputation and standing in the family. I was going to destroy both in one devastating evening. The anticipation was killing me, but I maintained my facade perfectly. I helped plan the party, contributed to the gift fund, and acted like the loving daughter they expected me to be. But every smile was calculated, every gesture was part of a larger strategy. They thought they had broken me, but they had actually forged me into something much more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The evening of my mother's 60th birthday party arrived with perfect weather and terrible timing for my parents. They had planned an elaborate celebration at their house, complete with catering, decorations, and enough extended family to fill a small church. Everyone who mattered in the Martinez family social circle would be there, which made it the ideal stage for my revelation. I arrived early to help with setup, playing the role of the dutiful daughter one final time. My mother was radiant in her new dress, accepting compliments and gifts from relatives who had traveled from across Arizona and New Mexico for the celebration. My father held court on the patio, regaling cousins and family friends with stories about his successful construction business and his pride in Diego and Carmen's achievements. The irony was not lost on me that they were celebrating with money partially derived from my stolen inheritance. The catered food, the expensive decorations, even the new patio furniture, all of it had been funded in part by profits from business loans secured with my trust fund. As the evening progressed, I waited for the perfect moment. That opportunity came during the traditional toast session, when family members would stand and share their favorite memories or express their gratitude for my mother. Diego spoke first, thanking our parents for their support and sacrifice in helping him achieve his dreams. Carmen followed with a similar tribute, crediting their guidance and financial assistance for her medical career success. When my turn came, I stood with a champagne glass in my hand and a smile that probably looked serene but felt like a weapon. The room fell quiet, probably expecting another brief self-deprecating speech from the family disappointment. "I want to thank Mom and Dad for teaching me some very valuable life lessons." I began, my voice steady and clear. "They taught me that blood is not always thicker than water. They taught me that parents do not always have their children's best interests at heart. And most importantly, they taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are capable of the deepest betrayal. The room's energy shifted noticeably. Confused glances were exchanged, and my parents looked increasingly uncomfortable. But I was just getting started. Many of you remember my grandfather, Roberto Martinez Sr., and how much he loved all his grandchildren equally. What you might not know is that he established education trust funds for each of us when we were teenagers. $50,000 each, meant to ensure we all had equal opportunities to pursue our dreams. My mother's face had gone pale, and my father was gripping his beer bottle so tightly I thought it might shatter. Diego and Carmen were staring at me with growing horror as they began to understand what I was revealing. Diego's trust fund paid for his MBA at Wharton. Carmen's covered her medical school tuition, but somehow, mysteriously, there was never any money available for my education. I was told the family could not afford to help me, that I would have to make my own way in the world. Miguel stepped forward from the crowd, his presence lending credibility to my words. As a respected attorney, his support carried weight with the extended family. Sophia asked me to investigate the estate records, he announced. What we discovered was systematic financial fraud spanning over a decade. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Aunt Rosa demanded to know what was happening, while Uncle Fernando asked if someone needed to call the police. My parents stood frozen, probably calculating whether they could somehow spin this situation in their favor. I pulled out a folder of documents I had prepared specifically for this moment. Not only did my parents steal my inheritance, but they have been using it as collateral for business loans while telling everyone what a failure I am for not achieving more. They have collected interest on my money for 10 years while watching me struggle financially. Carmen started crying, the reality of the situation finally hitting her. She realized that her success had been built on advantages that had been deliberately denied to me. Diego looked angry, but I could not tell if his rage was directed at our parents or at me for exposing the family secrets. The most disgusting part, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each revelation, is that they have spent years making me feel worthless and inferior while literally profiting from money that belonged to me. Every cruel comment about my failures, every comparison to my successful siblings, every lecture about responsibility, all of it while they were stealing from me. Mr. Whitfield chose that moment to arrive as we had planned. His presence added legal gravitas to the situation and made it clear that this was not just a family argument but a formal legal matter. Mrs. and Mr. Martinez, he addressed my parents formally, you have been served with legal notices regarding the fraudulent administration of your daughter's trust fund. You have 30 days to respond to the civil lawsuit and arrange for full restitution of the misappropriated funds. My father finally found his voice, but it came out as a strangled croak. Sophia, we can discuss this privately. There is no need to air family business in front of everyone. The audacity was stunning. After years of publicly humiliating me, he wanted privacy when the tables were turned. I was not about to grant him that courtesy. You forfeited the right to privacy when you decided to steal from me, I replied coldly. You wanted everyone to know what a disappointment I was. Now everyone can know what thieves you are. Aunt Rosa, who had always been the family's moral compass, stepped forward with fire in her eyes. Is this true? Did you steal from your own daughter? The disgust in her voice was palpable. My mother finally spoke, but instead of accepting responsibility, she went on the attack. Sophia has always been dramatic and resentful. She is just looking for someone to blame for her own failures. That response sealed their fate with the extended family. Even relatives who might have been willing to forgive financial mistakes could not stomach the continued cruelty toward their own daughter in the face of such serious allegations. Uncle Fernando, who had served as the family's informal patriarch since my grandfather's death, made his position clear. If these accusations are true, you have brought shame on the entire family. Roberto would be rolling over in his grave. The party dissolved into chaos as family members demanded explanations and chose sides. Some relatives left immediately, unable to stomach being associated with the drama. Others stayed to offer me support and express their outrage at my parents' behavior. Diego tried to approach me, probably hoping to negotiate some kind of family peace, but I was done with their manipulation. You benefited from their theft, I told him bluntly. Your success is built on my stolen opportunities. There is nothing to negotiate here. Carmen was more genuinely remorseful, but her tears felt too little too late. She had suspected something was wrong with the family's financial narrative, but had chosen to remain willfully ignorant because the truth was inconvenient. As the evening wound down and people began leaving, my parents found themselves isolated and disgraced. The family reputation they had worked so hard to build was in ruins, and the social standing they valued so highly had evaporated in a single evening. I packed up the legal documents and prepared to leave what would likely be my final family gathering. Mr. Whitfield assured me that the legal proceedings would move forward regardless of any attempted reconciliation efforts from my parents. Walking to my car, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. I had achieved what I set out to do: expose their hypocrisy and secure justice for their crimes. But I was also walking away from the only family I had ever known dysfunctional as they were. Miguel caught up with me in the driveway, offering both legal support and family solidarity going forward. "You did the right thing," he assured me. "Grandfather would be proud of you for fighting back." As I drove away from my childhood home for what I knew would be the last time, I felt something I had never experienced in that house: genuine self-respect. I was no longer the family scapegoat or the designated failure. I was a woman who had refused to accept injustice and had fought back against those who had wronged me. The war was far from over, but I had won the most important battle. My parents now faced public disgrace, legal consequences, and the loss of family support. They had called me useless, but I had proven them spectacularly wrong. The week following my mother's birthday party was a whirlwind of legal proceedings, family drama, and vindication that felt both surreal and deeply satisfying. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from relatives, some offering support and others demanding more details about the financial fraud I had exposed. The Martinez family rumor mill was working overtime, and for once I was not the target of their gossip. Mr. Whitfield moved quickly to freeze my parents' access to my trust fund and began the formal process of recovering the misappropriated money. The legal machinery was now in motion, and there would be no stopping it. Bank records were subpoenaed, business loan documents were scrutinized, and a forensic accountant was brought in to calculate the full extent of the financial damage. The results were even worse than I had initially suspected. Over the course of 10 years, my parents had not only used my trust fund as collateral for multiple business loans, but had also been systematically withdrawing money for personal expenses they had disguised as business costs. The total amount they had stolen from me approached $120,000 when interest and unauthorized withdrawals were calculated. But the financial fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. The forensic investigation revealed that my parents had been playing similar games with other family members' inheritances they had been entrusted to manage. Uncle Carlos discovered that his late wife's inheritance, which my parents had been administering for his children, had been significantly depleted through questionable investment decisions that primarily benefited my father's construction business. The family's reaction was swift and devastating for my parents. Aunt Rosa, who had always been the family's social coordinator, announced that my parents were no longer welcome at family gatherings until they made full restitution to everyone they had defrauded. Uncle Fernando went further, stating publicly that he no longer considered them part of the family and would be advising all relatives to cease doing business with my father's company. Diego and Carmen found themselves in an impossible position. Their professional reputations were built on achievements that had been funded by stolen money, and they were struggling to reconcile this knowledge with their self-perception as successful, ethical people. Diego initially tried to defend our parents, arguing that family business should remain private, but his position became untenable as more evidence of fraud emerged. Carmen took a different approach, reaching out to me with a tearful phone call asking how she could help make things right. Her guilt was genuine, but I was not ready to forgive her willful blindness to our parents' favoritism over the years. She had benefited from their crimes while watching them systematically destroy my self-esteem, and her belated remorse felt insufficient. The most satisfying aspect of the aftermath was watching my parents' carefully constructed facade crumble. My father's construction business began losing clients as word spread about the family scandal. Several prominent families in our community quietly canceled contracts, not wanting to be associated with someone who would steal from his own children. My mother's social standing evaporated even more dramatically. The women's auxiliary groups and charity organizations she had been involved with for decades suddenly found reasons to exclude her from their activities. Her bridge club, which had been the center of her social life for 20 years, asked her to step down from her leadership position. The psychological impact on my parents was visible and severe. When I encountered my father at the bank during one of the legal proceedings, he looked like he had aged a decade in 2 weeks. The confident patriarch who had lectured me about responsibility and success was gone, replaced by a broken man facing the consequences of his crimes. My mother attempted to reach out to me several times, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry accusations to tearful pleas for forgiveness. In one particularly pathetic message, she claimed that they had always planned to give me access to the trust fund eventually and that I was destroying the family over a misunderstanding. The gaslighting was so transparent and desperate that I almost felt sorry for her. But the most important development was not the destruction of my parents' lives but the rebuilding of my own. With Mr. Whitfield's help, I gained access to my trust fund and began making plans for the future I had always deserved. The money would allow me to pursue the art degree I had dreamed of, invest in proper equipment for my graphic design business, and finally live without the constant financial stress that had defined my adult life. I enrolled in a bachelor's degree program at Arizona State University, choosing to study digital media arts with a focus on business applications. At 28, I was older than most of my classmates, but I approached my education with a focus and determination that younger students often lacked. Every assignment felt like a victory over those who had tried to limit my potential. The graphic design business began flourishing as well. With professional equipment and marketing budget, I was able to attract higher-paying clients and build a portfolio that showcased my true abilities. Several of the family members who had supported me during the legal battle became my first major clients, hiring me for their own business marketing needs. Miguel proved to be an invaluable ally during this transition period. He helped me navigate the legal complexities of the restitution process and also introduced me to his professional network, which included several business owners who needed graphic design services. Having a respected attorney vouching for my character and abilities opened doors that had been closed to me before. The most unexpected support came from Mrs. Rodriguez, my landlord, who offered to serve as a reference for potential clients and even helped me secure a larger apartment that could accommodate a proper home office. Her belief in my potential meant more to me than she probably realized. As the weeks passed, I watched my former family's world continue to collapse while my own life expanded with new possibilities. The contrast was stark and satisfying. They had spent years trying to convince me that I was worthless and incapable of success, but their own actions had proved that they were the ones lacking in character and integrity. The legal proceedings moved toward a conclusion that would require my parents to liquidate significant assets to pay restitution. Their house, which had been the symbol of their success and the site of so many humiliating family dinners, would need to be sold. My father's business was facing bankruptcy and my mother would have to return to work for the first time in 30 years. Diego and Carmen were forced to confront the reality that their achievements were tainted by their parents' crimes. Diego's prestigious MBA and Carmen's medical degree would always carry the knowledge that they had been purchased with stolen money. Some siblings might have been able to rationalize this away, but the guilt was eating at both of them visibly. The family that had once looked down on me as the failure and disappointment was now facing public disgrace, financial ruin, and social ostracism. Meanwhile, I was building a new life based on my own abilities and the resources that had always rightfully belonged to me. Justice was being served in the most poetic way possible. The people who had called me useless were discovering just how capable I truly was when given a fair chance to succeed. 6 months after that explosive birthday party, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined when I was sitting at those awful family dinners feeling worthless and defeated. The legal proceedings had concluded with my parents being required to pay full restitution plus interest, totaling nearly $150,000. They were also facing criminal charges for tax fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, which would likely result in significant fines and possible jail time. The money was life-changing, but the vindication was even more valuable. Every cruel comment my parents had made about my lack of success now seemed laughably hypocritical. They had built their entire sense of superiority on stolen money and family fraud while I was proving my worth through genuine talent and hard work. My graphic design business was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. With proper equipment, professional marketing, and the confidence that comes from knowing your worth, I was attracting clients from across the Southwest. My portfolio now included work for major corporations, nonprofit organizations, and high-end restaurants. The creative vision that my grandfather had recognized years ago was finally being allowed to flourish. Arizona State University had become my second home. Despite being a decade older than most of my classmates, I found that my life experience and focused determination gave me significant advantages in my studies. My professors were impressed by my work ethic and maturity, and several had already approached me about potential graduate school opportunities. The most surprising development was the new family I had built from the allies who had supported me during the legal battle. Miguel had become like the older brother I had always wanted, offering both personal support and professional guidance. His wife Isabella welcomed me into their family circle, and their children called me Tia Sofia with genuine affection. Mrs. Rodriguez had evolved from landlord to surrogate grandmother, checking on my progress and celebrating every milestone in my education and business growth. Her pride in my achievements felt more genuine than anything I had ever received from my biological parents. She often joked that she had always known I was destined for greatness, even when I was eating ramen noodles and struggling to pay rent. Uncle Fernando and Aunt Rosa had also become important figures in my support network. They made it clear that in their eyes, I was the true Martinez family representative, carrying on my grandfather's values of integrity and hard work. They regularly invited me to family gatherings that pointedly excluded my parents, making sure I maintained connections to the extended family despite the scandal. Diego had eventually reached out to me with what seemed like genuine remorse and a desire to make amends. He had returned to therapy to deal with his guilt about benefiting from stolen money, and was working with a financial advisor to set aside money for my future restitution beyond what the court had required. While I appreciated his efforts, our relationship would never be the same. Too much damage had been done over too many years. Carmen's approach was more complicated. She had offered to help pay for my education costs as a way of making up for the advantages she had received through fraud. While I did not need her money anymore, I respected her attempt to take responsibility for her part in the family dynamic. We had begun having monthly coffee meetings where we slowly worked through decades of resentment and misunderstanding. My parents had become essentially irrelevant to my life, which was perhaps the most satisfying outcome of all. They had lost their house, their business, their social standing, and their family connections. My father was working as a foreman for someone else's construction company, while my mother had taken a retail job at a department store. The mighty had fallen hard, and their suffering was entirely self-inflicted. The most profound change was in how I saw myself and my place in the world. For 28 years I had internalized their narrative that I was the family disappointment, the one who could not measure up to my siblings' achievements. Now I understood that I had been fighting with both hands tied behind my back while they sabotaged my efforts and profited from my stolen opportunities. With fair resources and genuine support, I was not only successful but thriving in ways that surprised even me. My professors had nominated me for academic honors. My business was growing faster than I could handle alone, and I was being recruited by graduate programs I had never dreamed of attending. The art therapy sessions I had started attending helped me process years of psychological abuse disguised as family concern. Dr. Patricia Williams helped me understand that my parents' treatment of me had been a deliberate strategy to maintain their position as the family's financial gatekeepers while covering up their theft. By keeping me financially dependent and emotionally beaten down, they had reduced the risk that I would question their decisions or investigate my inheritance. But perhaps the most important realization was that their cruelty had actually made me stronger. Years of being underestimated and dismissed had taught me to be resourceful, determined, and self-reliant. When I finally got a fair chance to compete, I was more prepared than siblings who had been handed everything on a silver platter. Looking back, I could see that my grandfather had been right to believe in my potential. His letter to my parents had praised my creativity and independence, qualities that had been suppressed but never destroyed by their manipulation. Now, those traits were the foundation of my success in both business and academia. The family dinners I attended now were with my chosen family, Miguel's household, Mrs. Rodriguez and her extended family, and the tight-knit group of graduate students who had become my closest friends. These gatherings were filled with genuine warmth, mutual respect, and celebration of each other's achievements. No one was made to feel inferior or dismissed because their success did not fit someone else's narrow definition. The contrast with my childhood experiences was stark and healing. These people valued my contributions, celebrated my successes, and supported me through challenges without expecting anything in return except the same consideration. This was what healthy family relationships looked like, and I had never experienced anything like it before. As I prepared to graduate with highest honors and launch the expanded version of my business, I often thought about that terrible Sunday dinner when my parents had called me their most useless child. They had intended those words to crush my spirit and force me to accept their assessment of my worth. Instead, they had awakened a determination they never knew I possessed and set in motion the events that would expose their crimes and transform my life. The girl who had sat quietly at family dinners accepting insults and diminishment was gone forever. In her place was a confident woman who knew her value and refused to accept less than she deserved. I had learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones you need to fight the hardest, and that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied. My story had become a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of refusing to accept other people's limitations on your potential. When I spoke to other young women facing family pressure or financial obstacles, I always told them that their current circumstances were not their permanent address. With determination, strategic thinking, and the willingness to fight for what is rightfully theirs, anyone can rewrite their story. The most useless child had become the family's greatest success story, but more importantly, I had learned that I did not need their approval or acknowledgement to know my worth. I had built something beautiful from the ashes of their betrayal, and that achievement belonged entirely to me. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members who were holding you back, or discovered that people you trusted were working against you behind the scenes? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps others realize they are not alone in facing family betrayal and manipulation. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and do not forget to subscribe for more real-life drama and justice-served stories. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that they can overcome family toxicity and build the life they deserve. Thank you for listening to my journey from family scapegoat to successful entrepreneur and graduate student. Remember, blood may be thicker than water, but chosen family built on respect and genuine love will always be stronger than biological connections poisoned by greed and cruelty.